welcome to All Angles. I'm Dion Jackson Miller. What exactly will Jamaica do if after the next general election, each of the major political parties ends up with 30 seats? And why is the country in that position anyway? Some feel that by now guarantees should have been built into the system to ensure that there could not be an even split. These are the matters we want to address in detail today, and helping me to talk through some of the related issues, we have former Jamaica Labour Party representative of what was then the Electoral Advisory Committee, Anthony Johnson. We also have the principal of the Norman Manley Law School and the former Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, Keith Sobion, and political historian Troy Kane is also with us. We do hope to be joined by a member of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica a little later on. Before we hear from our guests, though, here's Gary Spalding.
Up to 5 years ago, the idea of a dead heat in a general election in Jamaica seemed a far-fetched notion. But the results of elections in Trinidad and Tobago in December 2001 and Jamaica in 2002 forcefully brought this remote possibility to the doorstep of the local electoral regime. Between 1944 and 1987, landslide victories were the order of the day in local politics. This changed in 2002 when the People's National Party garnered 34 seats to the Jamaica Labour Party's 26. Suddenly, the PNP had the most balanced composition in its history. With memories still fresh concerning the 1818 tie in Trinidad and Tobago, the stark reality of a dead heat happening here in Jamaica began to hit home forcefully. A 30-30 balance in the 60-seat House of Representatives could indeed create a constitutional crisis. The resulting calls for changes from an even to an odd number of seats came fast and furious. Both political parties agreed that this was the way to go. The Electoral Advisory Committee was instructed to formulate a plan to reconfigure some constituency. This was to be done in time for the 2007 elections. The EAC obliged, and by early 2004, its report was dispatched to the legislators. In a letter to Speaker of the House Michael Peart in February 2004, Chairman of the EAC Professor Errol Miller urged the legislature to move with dispatch on this issue. Professor Miller said the recommendations made by the EAC were designed to strengthen the democratic process and to avoid problems that can be clearly foreseen. The EAC identified 2 constituencies which had a higher number of registered voters than was constitutionally allowed. These were South St. Catherine, which had over 34,000 constituents, and Northwest St. James, with just under 34,000 voters. The EAC proposed that 14 polling divisions in South St. Catherine be transferred to South Central St. Catherine. Another 2 would be shifted from South St. Catherine to Southeast St. Catherine. In August 2005, the Cabinet approved plans to increase the number of constituencies to a maximum of 65. But the legislators had decided to increase it to 63 in the first instance and reserve the power to hike it to 65 whenever the necessity arises. The JLP had wanted the process fast-tracked and warned that it would take action if it was not completed in time for the 2007 election. However, last year, Director of Elections Danville Walker declared that this was unrealistic. He revealed that the process to increase the number of constituencies was not nearly completed. Among the time-consuming factors are the inevitable consultations and the negotiations with political representatives. It was always clear at meetings of the Parliamentary Committee examining the EAC recommendations that some sitting members of Parliament were not happy with proposals that have been advanced. But 2 related issues have been addressed. The 2 overweight constituencies have been brought within constitutional requirements, and the Electoral Commission has been legally established to replace the EAC. For All Angles, I'm Gary Spalding.
One of the things we do have to realize is that, of course, the Trinidadian situation could potentially bear some similarities to what could happen in Jamaica, given the similarities of our political systems and constitutions. So, Mr. Sobion, let me throw to you first of all. Just describe for us the kind of constitutional crisis that Trinidad found itself in after the 2001 election.
Well, in Trinidad and Tobago, there are 36 seats, which is an even number. So there's always the potential for it to be split evenly. Similarly, here in Jamaica, you have 60 seats, and you can have a similar type situation. The Constitution does not really make any provision for such an event. And if one were to go first to the experience of Trinidad and Tobago, then it may serve as some guide as to what may happen here, although not quite fully. After the 2001 elections, when the parties held 18 seats evenly, the leaders of both political parties met and agreed that they would leave the determination to the president. In your case, it would be the governor general, as to whom should be appointed prime minister. The president then made a decision which was not readily accepted by the person who was not chosen. And it leads, therefore, to questions of constitutional conventions and the role of political parties in ensuring that there is stability in the system. The reason why it failed in Trinidad was because the opposition refused to agree on the appointment of a speaker, and therefore the parliament could not have been convened. So Trinidad operated for several months, I think 9 months, almost a year, without a parliament until the next election was in fact called. In the context of the Constitution, the provisions relating to the appointment of a prime minister are similar here in Jamaica as it is to the Trinidad Constitution, and that is that the president or the governor general appoints the person who, in his view, is best able to command the majority of the members of parliament. And therefore, based on that, it would normally happen that the leader of one political party who has the majority of seats will be appointed almost automatically prime minister.
Was it perhaps that the selection in that case should have been done in a different way, given the sensitivity of the situation? Perhaps did the president, for instance, conduct extensive discussions with both sides to try to agree on a compromise candidate before announcing his decision?
Well, as I said, prior to the president being requested to make a decision, both parties had met over, it was several meetings prior to their coming to that conclusion. The president also met with them individually, subsequent to he having been asked. The point I made about it is that the fact that politicians may come to certain decisions and then renege on them is what caused the difficulty in Trinidad. If there were a convention, if there were traditions relating to that kind of issue, it would not have led to what eventually occurred. It really is a constitutional issue, and I would like to make 2 points on the Constitution. I think that the process of constitutional review should be an ongoing process. There perhaps should be a standing committee on constitutional review. And
meaning wherever, either in Trinidad
wherever,
or Jamaica.
yes. I don't think that one should wait until a crisis occurs to then try to patch it up. I think that one should have, as a matter of development, constitutional development, there should be an ongoing process of constitutional development. I think also that there should be a conscious effort on the part of the region, and because we all have similar constitutions, to develop conventions which would, to a large extent, be binding on those who are in the governance arena. And those 2 factors, I think, are important for how we develop our own constitutions and how we see to the needs for change.
Now, Senator Johnson, at the time, over the years in Jamaica, we've been used to majority governments, pretty large swings in some cases. So that's something that would have been unthinkable to us, say, 20 or 30 years ago. By 2001, though, by the time of the Trinidadian election, people here were starting to say, hold on, that could happen to us, isn't that so?
Yes, yes.
And our reaction was what? Because there was some discussion here at the time, people saying, could this happen to us, what should we do?
Yes, well, what has happened is that the Electoral Advisory Committee, the EAC, met on the matter and have recommended that the number of seats be increased and the number to be fixed. Now, at the time, it was a decision for Parliament to take. Now that there's an electoral commission, I think that they would take a decision, and I think it has to be ratified by Parliament, but I'm not sure. But as to the number, there was talk about going up to allowing a maximum of 65, but initially it wouldn't be 65, it would probably be an odd number. And the recommendation was that it should be an odd number, which would mean either 61, 63, or 59. But that wouldn't be an increase. But the point is that you should always have an odd number being the maximum, the number of seats for any election.
Of course, the rationale there being to ensure we never end up in that kind of situation.
Yeah, well, it's a funny thing, you know, because when we started out popular elections in 1944, we started with 32, and then we went to 45, which is an odd number. That was for the 59 election, and then we went to 53 just before, I think, independence. And then after independence, we pushed it up to 60 because that's the maximum allowed by the Constitution. The Constitution allowed us to increase by a number. So we could have increased it to 59 rather than go the limit of the 60, but we didn't. We increased it to 60, and so we are stuck with that. The business of putting in place the new number, the new maximum number of seats will be, I would imagine, one of the priority items to be brought about by the Electoral Commission. But it is something that is certainly in the public domain, and I think everybody is agreed that we need to have an odd number being the number of seats.
Troy Kane, there was a lot of attention on Trinidad, not just in Jamaica, but of course across the region. You know, words like unprecedented were being used, and we certainly tracked what was happening very, very closely. When you look at not just Trinidad, not just Jamaica, but everywhere else, was it historic in that sense?
I don't recall it happening anywhere in the Caribbean except in Trinidad. So it was historic in terms of what happened in Trinidad. It had never happened here. The closest we came to having some kind of deadlock was way back in 1949 and 1955. In one election, the party that got the majority of seats got the minority of votes, which was 17 to 30 with 2 independents, and the other one, when the PNP got 18 seats to the JLP's 14. Since then, the closest thing we have had is 2002. Which was, 34 to 26. So we haven't even remotely come close to having a deadlock over the years.
But of course, given what we've been seeing, it's very well a possibility. We don't know if it's going to happen.
It's always a possibility as long as you're going to have an even number, And the fact, as Tony explained, that we have gone through periods where we had 2 increases, one, as he explained, in 1959 when we went to 45, and in 1967 when we went to 53, we really ought to have gone back to an odd number when we did the next thing in 1976, but instead we went to 60.
Do you think it just wasn't in anybody's mind space, the possibility? People just didn't think that would ever happen?
Perhaps not, due to our political culture, because as I said, we have never had, outside of the period in the early days when the parties were close and when it was a possibility that independents could win seats, that kind of lingered around. But after that, once the entrenchment of the 2 major parties took place, it became almost an impossibility.
Well, when we come back, one of the things we want to do is take a look at our own constitution, some of the provisions, the similarities, for instance, to the constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, and what kind of situation we could find ourselves in constitutionally and politically. So stay tuned. You're watching All Angles. We're back in a moment. And we're back with you on All Angles. I'm Dion Jackson-Miller. We're talking today about constitutional issues and political issues. Of course, they're closely related. What would happen if we had a 30-30 tie in a Jamaican election? And why, in fact, are we in the position that we could still have that? We have with us former Jamaica Labour Party representative of the then Electoral Advisory Committee, Senator Anthony Johnson. Also, the principal of the Norman Manley Law School, Keith Sobion. He's also a former Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, and political historian Troy Kane is with us as well. We're talking there about that whole issue of an even number of seats in the parliament. Mr. Sobion, you wanted to add something on that?
Yes. Earlier I had made reference to the question of an ongoing process of constitutional reform and the need to develop conventions.
Explain first when you say conventions.
Conventions are unwritten aspects of the Constitution that are accepted as binding, even though they may not be within the actual four corners of the Constitution.
So it would govern how you would act in a given situation.
In a given situation. So like in a tied situation, you may have a convention developing that would break that deadlock. The reason why I raised it is also because it extends to even where you have uneven seats. There was the situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the 70s or early 80s when there were 13 seats. And of the two major parties, they won 6 each. An independent who won a seat in Kairaku, which is a small island which is part of St. Vincent, eventually became Prime Minister.
Power broker.
Yes. The retired James Mitchell.
Yes.
He had the authority to say to either party, listen, if you want me to be on your side, all I want is to be Prime Minister, which for some may not have been an unreasonable request. But the fact is that you can find...
But he got it.
He got it.
He became
yes, and he became Prime Minister for a number of terms out thereafter.
He went to the point where 2 terms later, he won 100% of the seats.
That's right.
In the legislature.
Yeah. So it is critical. Here it is. You have the vast majority of a population voting for one of 2 parties and a single individual who probably won his seat by 1 vote with the population in Kairaku of probably 800 persons and becoming Prime Minister. Now, that is a scenario that one could probably occur as well. And it may not be an expression, a true expression of the will of the people. There are some other models, I mean, at lower levels, in some, none of which I really accept anyway, but in some of the county council or parish councils, you can draw straws or you can flip a coin. We have provision for that in Trinidad at that level. If there's even holding of seats by 2 parties and you want to elect the mayor of that area, they vote, and if they can't decide, they draw straws.
That's what you call
but let me tell you exactly what the position is, however, and that is the person who has the call is the Governor General, and he doesn't have to consult with anybody. It is he, by our Constitution, who has the right to appoint the Prime Minister. And the system is that the Prime Minister appoints the Cabinet, and the Cabinet is the government. Now, I'll read from the Constitution, Section 70. It says, whenever the Governor General has occasion to appoint a Prime Minister, he, acting in his discretion, shall appoint the member of the House of Representatives who, in his judgment, is best able to command the confidence of a majority of the members of that House, and shall, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, appoint from among the members of the 2 houses such other members, ministers, as the Prime Minister may advise. Well, forget about the ministers for the time being. So it is the Prime Minister, the Governor General, acting in his discretion, appoint a member who, in his judgment, so it leaves it absolutely with the Prime Minister, with the Governor General. And in other jurisdictions, this happens all the time, particularly in multi-party jurisdictions in other parts of the world where two parties get together. What they usually do is they have minor parties and you form a coalition government. Or what normally happens is both parties attempt to get someone to switch from one side to the other. Now in Jamaica, our parties are very strong, and I wouldn't see anybody making a move at that time. It would be that person would be regarded as acting outside of the bounds. You talk about conventions. I don't think that would happen. But you could also look at a number of other things, such as the person who gains the popular vote. Because the popular vote would be the person who gains the majority of persons, not necessarily the number of seats.
But the difficulty, Anthony, with that is that you still have to convene a parliament. You still have to appoint a speaker. A speaker is appointed by a majority of the members of parliament.
And according to Section 43, you can't,
so
you can't do any business.
Exactly. So if you have a 30-30 split and you try to appoint a Speaker of the House,
well, it means, you know, the thing
that is where the deadlock happens in Trinidad.
I know, that's what happened in Trinidad. And they have a racial,
so you can get through that.
They have a racial problem in Trinidad, so they weren't able to, and it was hard lines drawn. But I don't know that in Jamaica, I mean, there are all sorts of things. You have a thing where somebody says, look, and this has happened, let's split it. I will be the government for 2 years, and you be government for 2 years, and we agree we have elections after.
Well, that is not a satisfactory way of governing a country in any event.
It mightn't be. I'm saying it has happened.
Yes, but the best thing would be to go back to the polls and hope for a difference.
Well, that
is what Trinidad ended up doing after 9 months.
No, because of this, by the way, most countries in the world today have gone away from constituencies and are using the proportional representation system. The majority of countries in the world. The majority of countries that have this system are the 53 countries in the British Commonwealth. Apart from the Commonwealth, there's very few, and the United States, there are very few countries which have retained the constituency system. And that doesn't make this liable at all, because it puts the parties, your parties put up slates, and it's according to who wins the higher percentage.
Yes, but some might say you're throwing out the whole baby with the bathwater when all you would need to do is ensure an uneven number of seats, because proportional representation carries its own difficulties and its own problems, as we've seen as well.
Well, I don't know that it has any serious. I mean, that's where everybody's going.
In terms of the
even
splintering of the parliament, the number of minor parties you can end up with, and difficulties just there in terms of political consensus. Is that good or bad?
A lot of people feel that if you have, I mean, in Jamaica, we had a party contested in '97, which had a lot of publicity and didn't get the 5%. So the people in Jamaica certainly are pretty strong that they're either one party or the other, one of the main parties. So we wouldn't have any difficulty, at least for the first couple of elections, if you had proportional representation. But proportional representation has the tremendous advantage in that everyone who is elected by Jamaica and has a commitment to Jamaica, not a commitment to a particular constituency or to a particular group of people. So it cuts down drastically on the number of people who are willing to create a problem in one area to put a man or a woman in on grounds that that is my person and going to give me something, because that can't work. You're talking about the entire 1.3 or 1.4 million people, and therefore the elections are fought more on policies and programs rather than on individuals and personalities.
Let's bring back Troy Kane here. Troy Kane, listening to all of this, you agree with Tony Johnson in terms of what he's saying about our political culture there and how our political system would react?
Relative to?
The possibility of a tie, the possibility of such a thing happening, and how it would be dealt with?
Well, I haven't thought much about proportional representation. I'm not sure I'm in that corner yet, right? And but I agree with Tony that our political system is so strong in terms of, as I said before, the entrenchment of two major parties, that it is hardly likely that we will face in the short run that kind of problem, you know, that others are facing that probably has not had that degree of entrenchment, right? Political entrenchment, that is. I believe that the system we have now can work as it is for a while, right? For a while yet, and just let it run its course. And I do agree with you. I think the thing to do is to have uneven number of seats.
Sobion?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, and again, I go back to my original position, that constitutional reform must be an ongoing process. It is not, for example, I will give you two examples of things that may not have happened as yet, but crossing the floor, for example, is an issue which is tied into this very question of the allocation of seats and the appointment of a prime minister. Should there be, and the question has been raised many times, often, should a person elected on one particular political platform be entitled to cross the floor and join the other side, or should he resign his seat? That is one of the issues that I think is critical in any serious discussion of constitutional reform in this area. Proportional representation may seem like a good idea on the face of it, but in small societies like ours, at the end of the day, a person wants to know, and you listen to any talk show, any public interaction, I want to see my member of parliament.
Let me ask you to hold that thought just a moment. We're going to pick up on that when we come back. You're watching All Angles. We're talking the Constitution. We're talking politics. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned. Thank you so much for staying with us on All Angles. I'm Dion Jackson Miller. We're talking about some constitutional issues today. We're looking at what will happen in Jamaica if you ended up with a 30-30 split after a general election. Can you imagine the headlines? And can you imagine the goings-on in Gordon House? Well, talking to us, we have the former Jamaica Labour Party representative of the then Electoral Advisory Committee, Senator Tony John.